This is the Overton Pod. Hello, Kanthan.
And I'm very pleased that you made it through the Johannesburg traffic.
Eventually. I always keep you waiting. I'm the world's worst co-host in that regard. I do apologize.
Who would have thought that
Who
would have thought that the Jews would be responsible for African time?
No, I told you this before. There's Jewish time as well, so I'm keeping to that. How are you otherwise?
I'm
Any
fit and
developments?
fabulous. I'm living my best life.
Yeah, we were just discussing
my
this
kids are on
off air.
holiday, and so I don't have to do the school run. I can actually just go into the office and
Enjoy your life.
and do fun stuff. Yeah.
Okay, well, what was you were telling me about a near-death experience? Something.
Oh, it was your point around. So you were throwing shade upon my age, and you said that
I was throwing. Well, I wasn't throwing shade. I was being complimentary. I was saying it's great that you're living your best
You
life.
said one gets to a particular stage in one's life where
Stop giving a shit about
yeah,
things
you
that
stop
don't
giving
matter.
a shit, and I reached that stage on 27th December 1999.
Okay, right. Now here we go. Here's the
When
story.
I managed to roll a car in the middle of the Karoo.
Wow.
And, yes, and it was quite epic. That I roll a car in the middle of the Karoo, and the place where I end up rolling the car has a concrete culvert, which then takes out a significant chunk of the left side of the car.
Wow.
Fortunately, my daughter, then 6 years old, was in a child seat in the back, and she was absolutely fine. But I had a broken left femur, shattered left humerus, 3 ribs on the left, 2 ribs on the right,
You did a good job.
cracked on the collarbone, both lungs punctured. No, it's lots of fun. And I came out of that, and I said, I don't have time to indulge people who do stupid shit. So
Like rolling cars or yeah, no, fair enough. So you just kind of that kind of I suppose near-death experience.
yeah, so
Very much so with those kinds of injuries.
Yeah, and you basically realize that you've got a finite amount of time,
Yeah.
and you really want to spend it having arguments with idiots. So, just agree
Or
with them.
worrying
and move on.
about the stuff that doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
on a daily
like,
basis.
like the fact that the president of the United States is in diapers and has 5,046 nuclear weapons at his disposal.
Yes. Is it 46 or 47? I feel like he might have misplaced one and just forgotten about it.
It's very likely. Maybe he's redeployed one of them to what's that country in the Middle East where he says that he's not helping them?
The Israel one or
Yeah,
or a
that
different
was it,
one?
Israel. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they've got about 350 of their own, so I think they're fine on the nuke front. Let's talk about that quickly because the American presidential debate was last week. We sort of threw forward to it in the last podcast briefly, but it was a disaster for Joe Biden. Essentially, Donald Trump was very restrained, helped a lot by the format that was chosen by Biden and CNN, which was we're going to mute the microphones when whoever else is not talking. And they did this thing where they had a split screen, which is usual for the debates, but they often have a split screen and then they go to full screen, whereas they decided the entire time to keep it on split screen. And what they did was 2 things. So firstly, Joe Biden had a terrible debate where he didn't complete sentences or he rambled off into incoherence.
But you see, I don't see that as being a terrible debate because that has been Joe Biden for the past 3 years.
Yeah, it has, but I'll get to why I think you're wrong on this, why I think it makes a difference this time round. But the split screen also did something else, which is that usually you don't see what the other person is doing while your competitor, your opponent, is making a point. In this case, you could see exactly what they were doing. So Trump, you got the usual Trump sort of facial gestures and expressions. Biden, you got a man who was just completely staring into space, his mouth open, wide, catching flies half the time.
No, John, you don't see the big picture because Biden is focused on running the economy of the United States. He has to juggle multiple wars on multiple fronts. So he's got to worry about Israel. He's got to worry about Ukraine. He's got to worry about Taiwan. And
that's what he was doing all that time.
and there's a couple of bits and pieces, so there's South American countries where he's trying to pretend to overthrow the government so that the government can effectively get back in power. No, I think that I agree with all of the lefty journalists who last week said this is the best Joe Biden ever.
So, all right. So I hear you playing devil's advocate. there was a freak out after the debate. MSNBC losing their minds over it. And they usually are obviously very supportive of Biden. But even them coming out and saying this is the worst Biden's ever looked, et cetera, et cetera. What subsequently happened is the interesting part. And I get what you're saying about the past 3 years. Essentially, there was a clip I saw earlier today, which showed Joe Biden on the 21st of January 2021, so the day after he took office. And he was as incoherent then as he was at the debate. So essentially, America has had what I perceive as a Manchurian candidate in the presidency since the beginning. You have a man who
literally, because he was on China's payroll.
That too, yes. So literally and in the figurative sense, a person who's in the position but is essentially either controlled directly or the decisions being made are not his. And so that's insane. It really is kind of nuts. If some people will argue, well, you've had plenty of people where that hasn't been the case. And in this case of the Americans, you've got deep state making decisions all the time and all those things. But the point is I don't think certainly not in the recent past have they had a situation like this where the president is not even aware of the decisions that may or may not have been made on his behalf. And the difference now is that just a week before the debate, we had the White House themselves, the media, saying that those videos we spoke about it were cheap fakes, right? So manipulated. Now, after the debate, a week after, you have people admitting, the same people, the New York Times, admitting the very videos they called cheap fakes are in fact, they are questioning those same videos. Look how bad Biden looks in this video. And so what's happened is there's been a turning. And for the first time in the entire Biden presidency, you have leaks from the White House or alleged leaks. You have this thing
John,
they did with Trump.
I can't believe that you're supporting the leftist media on this narrative. Because
Okay,
it's very clear that what they're trying to do is now to engineer a regime change to undermine the democratic decision of Democratic voters in the primary to put this man to stand for election. I say that the views of the voters must be respected and he must be allowed to run. Absolutely. And
right.
Remember at the point at which we are deeply distrustful of the American mainstream media at almost every conceivable level.
True. I'm still distrustful of them.
Why on earth are we now agreeing with their viewpoint? You see,
because if I have a view on the world, so 10 days ago, my view on Joe Biden is that he has dementia, probably, if anyone cares to know, vascular dementia, and he has always been an incapable president, incompetent, and there were always kind of handlers, people making calls for him, Susan Rice and people like that. That's always been my opinion, based on the data, the evidence that I was looking at, seeing the man bumbling around, not being able to walk properly, sunsetting, doing weird and wonderful things at G7 meetings, etc., over years.
But Jill has got that covered. You see her shepherding him around the place.
She may be doing that, but
puts out his speeches for him, and, prompts him when to read, and so all of the touch points are there. I think we're making too much of a big deal about this.
All I'm saying is my opinion I had 10 days ago is still the opinion I have. The fact that they may have caught up to my opinion because, and this is the reason they've caught up, it's not that they may be trying to engineer something which is against democracy. I agree with you. On the face of it, Joe Biden won the primaries because they wouldn't let anyone run against him.
Correct.
And so he should be the candidate at the convention. I agree with that, based on democracy. However, the reason they want to engineer a change now has everything to do with the fact that after that election, after that debate, he's going to lose the election. It's now de facto. So if Joe Biden now runs against Trump, if it stays as it is, he loses. There's no doubt about that. Before the debate, Trump was leading, but it was leading by a couple of points within the margin of error in the swing states. And so it wasn't for certain. I will say for certain now, if Joe Biden runs against Donald Trump wins that election. And that's the reason why they've pivoted to my view. It's not that, and I'm not going to change to the opposite.
Except Trump is not going to win the election if undocumented immigrants are allowed to vote without ID.
Sure, if that happens, but I think the volume and the context of that is something that's potentially a broader discussion. It's not as straightforward as Elon Musk sort of tweeting and saying, "Oh, illegal immigrants are voting." That's somewhat true, but as we've discussed, it's where you're voting, how you're voting, what the election observers are. You pointed out that there's this massive ground game that the Republicans are running this time round. So, look, let's leave that behind for now. It's just an interesting development, and I think, regardless of what we think, there's going to be developments in the American system, because there is now a faction clearly trying to remove Joe Biden and a faction trying to keep him in power.
So let's talk about that, because the big issue that they've got right now, and the single biggest obstacle that they've got in terms of removing Joe Biden, is that they've realized that if they're going to remove Joe Biden, they have no excuse for not letting Kamala Harris actually step up and take pole position.
Yes,
and remember, so they boxed themselves into a corner because they had this commitment to saying that we want to have a woman of color as the first layer, as the vice president in the last time round, and the idea is to steer her up to pole position. Now, the most likely person that they could be putting up, who still follows their narrative, is Gavin Newsom from California. But now can you imagine the backlash in terms of the narrative if they suddenly prop up a white male and everyone's going to turn around and say, wait a second, have you not got any strong black women? Have you not got any strong black men? Have you not got any trans candidates that you can put up? And so DEI has come around to bite them. And I think what we are seeing very quickly is a swing around in the narrative from the point at which the debate took place, and everyone, I think, was quite stunned at the extent to which all of the hyenas turned upon Scar in this particular case, and were trying to rip him to shreds. And then suddenly there's a backlash with people saying, no, hang on a second. If not him, who are we going to actually put up?
Yeah.
So it's a major disaster for them. The astonishing thing, of course, is that if you look at all of the stats, RFK Jr. is hugely popular.
RFK Jr. has 20%.
If you look at the stats,
support.
Okay.
20% support is not 45.
No, yeah, but he's hugely popular.
Yeah.
And he's the person who's most likely to be able to take on Trump.
Maybe.
Okay, and I say this, on the basis that all of the touch points on which people are now looking to Trump for, RFK Jr. actually has a lot of those touch points. So, for example, the touch point in terms of the border, closing the border. Okay, Gavin Newsom is not in favor of closing the border. Gavin Newsom allows untrammeled loads of immigrants into California, and he's deeply unpopular for that reason. Ditto in the case of Harris. So just take that as one major point of concern. Secondly, RFK Jr. is in favor of not spending money on forever wars and actually spending that money on building the country. So in other words, these are all centrist positions which people are drawn to Trump, not because they like Trump, but because they intensely dislike the fact that the Democrats have been undermining these core tenets of what being an American is all about, and how to run a successful country. And if there was a candidate who was hitting those touch points, then people would be likely to say, well, if RFK is going to fix the border, as an example, well, I'm going to give him a shot. But that's not going to happen because of the fact that RFK is a candidate that cannot be controlled by the DNC. And so that's how we have this utter disaster that we've got right now. I think the way that this is going to run, the only possible thing that they could do is bring in Michelle Obama as a last-minute candidate, because then Kamala Harris is not in a position to pull the black woman card.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the Michelle Obama thing's been raised a couple of times. I think she'd be very silly to get into this at this point. And the reason for that is I don't think, had she done this a year ago, had before the primaries, had they turned around, Joe Biden turned around and gone, listen, I'm not going to run. I've had a good one. My job here was to settle the ship. And I've done that. That's what I promised to do. And I've done that. Of course, he'd be lying again, but it's irrelevant. And he has said that and said, look, Michelle's gonna take it from here, or they would have found a way to rig it. But bottom line is, she would have ended up in the position. Then she would win. I don't know that when it ends this way. So you have it coming from a position of Biden has to leave, not because he's leaving by choice, but because, and he's not leaving by choice, because as things stand, the Bidens don't want to go anywhere.
Well, as things stand, he's not leaving.
That's right. Mm-hmm. But he was also resisting all calls for him to leave. He had a telephone call with 20 governors yesterday to try get the support of 20 governors, because he needs insiders to support him. Anyway, the point is he's not leaving. So if he does go, it will be framed as he's agreed to leave, but it'll be very clear that it's under some sort of duress, that he's made that agreement. Now you've got a person coming into that position. So there's a whole bunch of Biden supporters that are already going to be turned off by that. Doesn't matter who comes into the spot, even if they like the person who comes into the spot. You've also got the situation where, because the media has turned, and for whatever reason they've done that, you've got a whole bunch of people going, hold on a second, I've been told for 3 years that the Republicans were just lying and they were being unfair and they were mischaracterizing Biden. And you've got a whole bunch of people so-called red-pilled to the idea that their government has not been run by the person they democratically elected. I don't know that you can predict an election, even if you put a person in that everybody likes, someone like Michelle Obama. Even if you put someone like that in, I don't know that you can predict that election 4 months out, and that you can actually get those votes. There's another problem, by the way.
You are trying to apply reason to an irrational situation.
Well, I'm saying that in an irrational situation, I'm not applying reason. I'm saying it becomes chaos. And in that chaos, it's impossible to turn around and go, Michelle Obama equals popular, therefore no problem, beats Trump. In a normal election, I agree. In this one, 4 months out, I don't. Or I don't believe it's very easy to predict that win, when it would be an easy win to predict. The other thing to say is that there are a whole bunch of rules which prevent Biden from just kind of leaving and inserting someone else. So the Democrats used to have what's called an open convention. I don't know if you how aware of this you are. Oh, you studied in America, so you must be. But the Democrats had an open convention up until the mid-'60s. And then they decided, no, we can't have this open convention where we're not sure who the candidate might be until the convention. So they have a closed convention. And that means that every primary won by a candidate, those electors are pledged to them. And they basically legally have to provide their votes to that candidate. So Joe Biden has all these votes pledged to him. And so the problem is to get him out is quite difficult because of their own rules that they made. Over and above that, you have certain states, in fact, many of them, where it's becoming, not just yet, but it's going to be too late to change the ballot. So Biden is printed on the ballot.
They can Article,
you can have Joe Biden.
They can Article 25 him at this point.
Yes, they could 25 him,
they
and then that changes
25
everything.
him now.
Yes,
which immediately puts Harris into position.
Yes,
which then means that they have the option of going out and choosing another candidate. So I'm saying that there's lots of bells and whistles that go with this thing that can still be made use of. I think it's too early to call in terms of how it's going. I think a lot of people are still banking on the possibility that they're going to put Trump in jail, because remember that the sentencing of Trump has been deferred up until the eve of the election. And
no, it's not the eve. So at the moment, it's 2 weeks postponed. Mm-hmm. We'll see how much longer that goes. There's an argument now being made.
My understanding is that it's currently set for October.
No, so it was pushed 2 weeks.
Okay. All right. I stand corrected.
But it probably will go longer. You're right. Mm-hmm. In the overall sense of it because there was a Supreme Court ruling subsequently about what is official and non-official business of the president and what they can and can't be prosecuted for. And the Supreme Court has said if it was done as official business, basically, the president has absolute immunity. And so Trump's now going to make argument that a lot of the things that were admitted as evidence in the New York case, which found him guilty, were in fact not allowed to be admitted. They were under immunity. And so that case becomes almost a mistrial in a sense. So we'll see. They may be able to try and push it all the way past the election. I don't know if they'll get that right.
No, the idea is not to push it past the election.
Yes, they want it before the election.
They want him in jail before the election.
But he wants to push it past the election.
I don't think so. I think that he's very happy right now to be conducting a campaign from within prison.
Personally, I think it would play well for him. Whether he's happy to do that, I'm not sure about that.
Steve Bannon has gone to jail for the next.
Yeah, Steve Bannon's gone to jail for 3 months for the most ridiculous reason.
Well, it's basically contempt of Congress.
Yes,
which they did not charge Hunter Biden with.
They haven't charged anyone with it they haven't put anyone in jail for it for more than 60 years since the McCarthy hearings. So, it's completely nuts. I mean, Eric Holder, who was Obama's Attorney General, was held in contempt of Congress, and nothing happened to him. It's not ideal. You're not meant to be in contempt of Congress, but politically, it's kind of understood that we don't lock away our political opponents. Certainly not people high up on the political spectrum, because that sends a bad message. It's what dictators in banana republics do, and so Americans have generally shied away from doing that just because of the optics more than anything else. Now optics are obviously out the window because Orange Hitler might rise to power again. So there's that. Right. Shall we change tack a bit?
Sure.
All right. That's enough on the Americans. Interesting developments, but enough on the Americans. South Africa, we haven't had a good chat, and I'm happy we haven't, because there's obviously been a lot of rubbish going back and forth about, firstly, the Government of National Unity, the GNU, as some people like to now call it. I suppose that was inevitable. The media always looks for some sort of short, nice, punchy way to advertise and promote media and their media reporting. But we've got a GNU now. we have a government. We haven't discussed that. I wanted to wait until it actually existed rather than everyone's WhatsApp groups. I felt like we were back in COVID a little bit, because I was getting messages on the WhatsApp group going, "Oh, here's the list." These sort of, someone had typed up in Word their listing of who was going to end up in which post and all the rest of it. Now we actually have the listing and the ministers, and we know who's in government. So I want to talk about that, and then maybe a little bit about Gauteng, because, it harks back to what you said before the election around the importance of Gauteng. But let's chat about the national one. Perhaps I'm not surprised by, obviously Cyril was president, and I'm not surprised by Paul Mashatile in the least. I think anyone who hasn't been paying attention. But John Steenhuisen in agriculture. Tell me what you think about that.
I don't think that we should drill down to John Steenhuisen in agriculture as much as actually just trying to take a big picture approach around what they are likely to potentially achieve in these positions. So let's take a look at the various categories into which they are currently slotting. So basic education.
Yeah.
Okay. On the one hand, it's an utter disaster. On the other hand, they are such simple things that Siviwe can do to fix it in a very short space of time that is going to make a huge difference in the lives of people, even if it's just the single thing of taking on SAT2. And the way in which you take on SAT2 is by enforcing the requirement that all teachers be tested for competence within the framework of the labor laws of the country.
Yeah.
And it's just that, very simply. So the starting point around fixing basic education is something that the DA can do, because it's a fact that education in the Western Cape is better run than any other province in the country, because of the fact that it's those relatively simple disciplines that are put in place.
I'm just
So now let's
laughing.
So now let's take a look at the other things that she's committed to.
Yeah.
Okay. Now she's also said that she wants to get internet connectivity into every single school around the country in a relatively short space of time. How do you go about doing that? Well, the only way you can do that effectively at in a very short space of time, without coughing up a lot of money, is through Starlink.
Maybe you could do it with cell phone towers.
No, well, you'd need to. Do you know the cost of putting up cell phone towers?
Not necessarily. The cell phone towers are there, Kanthan. We've got
No.
coverage nationwide.
No. The cell phone towers are not in the rural areas. Okay, so no. Let's be clear about this. You can very quickly do internet connectivity within the urban centers, and in fact, most schools already have some form of internet connectivity. But the idea is that if you want to roll out material that's actually stored on central servers, which ideally you want to do, because you want to kill the dependence that people have on textbooks. Mm-hmm. Okay, because again, textbooks are a racket. They get lost. They have to be printed every year, and there are people who make massive amounts of money, and we still have people who end up not working. So, taking now the promise of connectivity in terms of the internet. What's the other ministries that the DA has?
Yeah, I knew you were going to go here. They have communications, which is why you want to say they're just going to tell ICASA to give Elon his license.
Yeah, so they tell ICASA to give Elon his license, okay? Then the other ministry that they've got is Public Works. Now, you and I have spoken about Public Works, and the crucial thing that I keep saying, people don't understand. Public Works owns every single government building. That means they own all the schools, they own all the hospitals. So, every building that is currently decrepit is not the result of the ministry that is occupying that building, but it's as a result of Public Works. So now when you've got the DA running Public Works and in a position to come in and ensure that schools actually get fixed efficiently and quickly within budget without crony capitalism kicking in, you've got a very niche ecosystem that's now just built itself across those three ministries that's going to give them the ability to do fairly drastic changes in a short space of time. And really all you need to end up doing is to create a perception in the minds of the public. And it's very easy to do with schools because the parents in those schools are going to be able to see immediately. We have a DA minister who has now come in. She's a young black woman, and she has fixed these very basic things that we haven't had for years. And my God, I'm going to vote DA come next election. So I think that there's been a tendency of people to try and say, yeah, Steenhuisen has got agriculture. Look, from my perspective,
you didn't want to drill down on it, but you did drill down on everything else. So drill down a little bit for me.
So let's drill down in terms of what is it that we expect our Minister of Agriculture to do? Okay, because let's be very clear about this. Agriculture in South Africa actually works fine.
Mm-hmm. Because it's in private hands.
Because it's in private hands. Because we've got very well-run farms in this country. We don't have a problem with food security in this country, thanks to our farmers. And really all the Minister of Agriculture needs to do is to just steer the ship in such a way that he's minimizing the impact of restrictions that currently get put by all sorts of regulations on the farming community. And if the only thing you do is, as Steenhuisen, if you sit there for the next couple of years and just simply refuse to have your department enforce any regulations that are in place, you'll suddenly see a huge uptick in terms of the agricultural value of the country. So those are very simple things that we can take a look at. And that's why I think that the DA has got everything to gain and nothing to lose.
Okay, so let me give my take. But I also want to then follow up with you. Look, so I think agriculture was given as a bit of a joke to John. I think from Cyril's perspective, from the ANC's perspective, they thought, where can we put him where he will almost be hidden? Because this is the other issue is you've seen this with several of the DA ministers already, going on social media, engaging with people, trying to fix things openly, and being sort of accessible, which is something we haven't really had with ministers previously, other than maybe Fikile Mbalula, who wasn't accessible in a useful way. He was just accessible as the clown. Now, the problem is that agriculture most people aren't involved with agriculture. So John can't exactly play that role. And I think they thought they would just kind of placate him with that type of position. Now, I agree with you, though, that John has a good chance to actually just do good for the country. But the problem is politically, that good may not be well seen or known about. Certainly, we're not going to have media reporting on John Steenhuisen's huge successes as agriculture minister because they still fundamentally don't like the guy for existing. Right. So, but that's on.
However, take the view that if you ask most people, what does the Minister of Agriculture do? Now, so remember that Department of Agriculture used to be Agriculture and
Land Reform.
And Land Reform has now been...
And isn't it Land Reform and Rural Development? I
think? Yes. Yeah, which has, but Land Reform
been taken away,
and it's been given to the PAC, which is actually a very clever thing to do because the PAC's thing has always been that they want to be doing stuff with land. So what it means is that the level of responsibility that Steenhuisen ends up with is substantially reduced, which means that his formal role as leader of the opposition, and he still has to play that role even though he's part of the GNU because there's an election coming up in 2 years' time. It's actually going to give him far more free time to be able to do that than if he actually had a ministry.
And that may or may not have been an active decision by the DA when they were offered that position to say, yes, we will in fact take it because looking at it, it works for us. I'm just trying to think of both sides because the idea is that both sides had to come to some sort of happy arrangement here. And the follow-up question I wanted to ask you, look, on this basic education stuff, I'm not sure that, I think you're giving a little bit too much credit to Siviwe Gwarube in terms of she wants internet so that she can then put textbooks in schools more easily. I don't think she's thought that far. I think she's thought very...
No, John, come on. Why are you being so skeptical about someone
Because politicians are idiots and and because they're normies and their IQs are that of normies at best. And so what she's done is she's gone... What is important for children to have access to? The internet. Because I read that on a News 24 article once upon a time, or a Daily Maverick piece, whatever it is. I tell you what, we'll still be doing the podcast in 2 years' time. And if in 2 years' time, we'll have had at least we'll have 1.5 school cycles done, right? But we'll have the next school cycle, and maybe we just wait for the next one to happen. Okay, so the 2026 school cycle. If she's used internet connectivity to change the distribution of textbooks, I will apologize to her and say that she was actually smart about that. But I don't think that's what she's planning. I think she's just saying
you mistake me. I'm of the view that textbooks, as we know them, are actually close to being obsolete.
I'm of the opposite view, but
okay. Yeah, very simply, because if you look in terms of the way in which technology is moving around the world right now, we are eventually going to move to a point of guided instruction on an individual basis. That obviously needs to happen under a supervised regime, but you are not going to have a one-size-fits-all approach to teaching. You're going to have kids who are at a high level, for example, in language, and at a low level in mathematics, and they get trained at the appropriate level, because this is the way in which the world is actually going to be moving, and crucial to every single bit of this is going to be access to connectivity, very simply. And the sooner we roll out connectivity to the masses...
Again, that may happen. I'm just saying that's not where her head is at. And
I don't know her. I've never met her.
No, neither have I. Neither have I. So, I'm being very judgmental.
And I tend to be generous until people do stupid shit. And,
Okay, all right.
yeah.
Well, the internet connectivity is great. I just don't think that she's thinking 17 steps ahead as you are. But you're that type of person, and you've got an engineering brain. So, that's what you do automatically. But I'm not convinced. But regardless, it may occur anyway.
But more crucially, this is an important point to consider as well, is that unlike the ANC, the DA is actually receptive to taking ideas from people like me, not necessarily implementing them.
Yeah,
but at very least, they do have the capacity to listen.
Yes,
and to
I agree
say,
with that.
Yeah, and to say, and that's, and I cannot tell you what a huge difference that's going to make in those very specific ministries, because you've got someone who'll be prepared to say, yeah, well, maybe I'll take a tiny bit of this idea, which I can then turn into something useful.
Well, I think, on comms, for example, it's interesting. I really hope the DA is smart enough to use the ANC's tactics and the law that they've created over time against them. So I'll give you an example. I'm not really interested in Starlink. I hope they give Elon Musk his license. I think it'll be good. I think competition is good. If Starlink comes into the country and you're able to get Starlink, which is still going to be something for the middle classes and up, but it's 12,000 Rand to set it up. So, you're not, you may have it bought for villages and things.
That's no longer the case, because right now, the scenario that you've got, all of the satellites that Musk has been deploying over the past couple of weeks allow you to receive Starlink directly on your mobile phone. It eliminates the need for cell phone towers.
Okay, but that's not available in this country or any country just yet.
No. It's been rolled out in many parts of the world. Remember that the connectivity of handsets is the part that's not been enabled, because Musk goes through this process where he ensures that he has enough of a critical mass before he actually rolls out the feature. But trust me, these have been rolled out. All of the satellite launches that Starlink has been doing over the past couple of weeks.
Even if it's not 12,000 Rand for a satellite dish, it's not happening on a 2,000 Rand phone off Take-A-Lot. Okay? It's all the newer stuff.
No, it's going to happen on a 2,000 Rand phone on Take-A-Lot.
Okay. All right.
You're talking about LTE signals coming from satellite to your phone. Because remember that these are low Earth orbit satellites.
They are low Earth orbit, but my understanding of that technology is that it's not exactly the same. It doesn't. You need slightly improved receivers.
You need to read up on the advances in tech that has been made over the past very short space of time.
Yes. Fine. But
specifically,
that come through to the shittiest Huawei phone you can buy.
That will come through to the shittiest Huawei phone. And let's be very clear.
I stand to be corrected on that then. I'll go read it up, but I don't believe you as we stand right now. I have to go read it up, and I want to see it for myself. That technology is not available anywhere in the world right now. And Musk isn't promising it by the end of this year or the end of next year.
It's not available commercially.
Yes.
Okay.
We've got 5 years to deal with, though, Kanthan. So if Musk turns around and goes, in 2 years' time, it's available in the States, and does his usual thing where he rolls out, there's a very reasonable expectation that we won't have that tech for 4 to 5 years ahead.
Well, we won't until the satellites that are currently, the Starlink satellites specifically that are in orbit above our country are replaced.
Well, there's a whole bunch of things that need to happen. Not just the satellites need to be replaced. There's regulations on the ground that need to be overcome.
No. But you see, he doesn't have to worry about the regulations on the ground. He needs to get the satellites up there first, which he has been doing all over the world.
Yes.
Whether he enables connectivity for people on the ground is a question of flicking a switch, as we found out.
All right.
I'm
not a big Elon Musk fanboy. So cool, that's great. He's going to save the world and give everyone.
You don't need to be a fanboy to be a fan of his tech.
Cool. He's going to save the world and give everyone free internet access on their phone.
But
I don't believe it. So I'm saying it right here, right now.
It's not going to be free internet access. It's going to be paid for internet access. But remember, the cost of rolling out cell phone towers is substantial. Okay.
Yes.
So you have to roll out the cell phone towers. You have to roll out the electricity supply for the cell phone towers. You have to actually ensure that there's a stable connection to the rest of the network.
Yeah.
There's
lots of things that have to be done.
Yeah. And so what he's done is he's bypassed all of those problems by effectively having the satellite that is providing the connectivity that a cell phone tower would previously have done, without the need to do what MTN has to do in Nigeria, where every single cell phone tower has to be protected by electric fences because there are generators and there are armed guards guarding every cell phone tower. And suddenly, poof, that business model goes away.
Cool, but we're not in Nigeria. We're in South Africa, where cell phone towers do get sometimes vandalized.
Vandalized all the time.
Yeah, sure. But for the most part, they function and they're pretty good. And the capital expenditure on a lot of that network has long ago been paid off. And so he's going to bring out a technology which is not going to cost zero. Okay, and is going to compete against other companies.
You're being disingenuous. I'd never at any point said it'd be zero cost. What I did say
what I was
the
getting at,
the cost of rolling out to rural areas is going to be cheaper than any other method that's currently available.
And we shall see, because we do not know that. We don't know that. We don't because we don't. What is the cost of rolling out that tech right this second? We don't know. There's no price.
Let's work on the assumption that it is 12,000 Rand per school, as you said.
Okay, so if we work on the assumption there's 12 grand, I'm not talking about schools. I was just talking in general. I was saying for communications.
But we're talking very specifically in the context of the problem that the DA is trying to solve.
No. What I was
which is to get all schools connected.
You on a one-track mind, and I'm trying to get you off the one track. So you can have your point about schools and that the DA has this great master plan that the education minister is now going to work with the comms minister.
You and I are sitting at, you and I are sitting and having a conversation here right now. Yeah. Let's say that perchance that you have people in the DA who are sitting and listening to this conversation.
Sure.
There is John saying, no, they're a bunch of idiots and they're a bunch of wankers because all politicians are that way. And then you have Kanthan saying...
I definitely didn't use those words, but anyway.
And you have Kanthan saying, on the other hand, here are the possibilities that they'll be able to tap into that are going to be able to give them easy wins.
Yes.
What do you think are the chances are that they're going to take your viewpoint?
I think right now they're
mine?
listening and going, Jonathan was about to make a point of how the DA needs to use the ANC's policies and rules and laws against them. And he never got to make that point because Kanthan was so obsessed with Elon Musk. So I'm going to give you the Elon Musk win. And I'm going to say to you that at some point in the next 10 years, Elon Musk is going to roll out internet that is going to just be magical. Okay, I'm going to give it to you. But I'm also going to say that doesn't exist right now. And if you wanted to make a difference by December, you wouldn't be doing it using Elon Musk's technology. Not in this country. Okay? And so...
No, you'd roll out regular Starlink. But the obstacle...
You wouldn't even roll out regular Starlink. You might just roll out Vodacom LTE. Okay?
You can only
or MTN or Celsius or whatever.
John, again, you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
In order to roll out Vodacom LTE to a place that doesn't currently have connectivity,
sure,
you first need to run a cable that has sufficient bandwidth from the Vodacom backbone to that station. And the cost of running that out to all of these rural schools is certainly not going to be 12,000 Rand.
Fine. So I'm giving it to you. I'm giving you the win. You can have it. Elon Musk is going to change together with the DA. They're going to use his technology. Starlink. Cool. I'm going to give you the Starlink win. I won't use his name. The bottom line is I don't care. Because that's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to, and that would be one individual little thing that might or might not occur. And I still don't think it's going to occur. What I was talking about was internet connectivity and the cost to the average individual. 12,000 Rand is still a lot for the average individual in this country. Which then you made the point about the cell phones being able to pick up the stuff. And I said, well, devices still cost money. And we went down that road. Right. But if we assume that that's still going to happen, great. That's not the point I'm making. Communications is an interesting portfolio for me because communications includes, if I'm not mistaken, the SABC. And it includes broadcasting. And I really hope the DA applies their minds a little bit better to how they can structure that broadcasting, not to push their propaganda, but certainly to stop pushing propaganda in general, government propaganda, and hopefully just try and inform and educate people a little bit better through that department. And I think that is the best opportunity in the communications area. And that's the only point I was trying to make before we went on to our little diversion there. That's in terms of communications. Basic education, I don't see as a major win. And the reason is I do think you can make a massive difference to people's lives and the lives of kids, obviously, that are trying to get a basic education. The issue is that you only see real outcomes from changes to basic education after about 2 decades. So the very real effects of a good system of basic education take that long to occur because those people have to join general society and kids don't until they're 18 or 20. And so I think she'll make improvements. I certainly, as much as I said she's a normie, I do think she will make improvements because she's a competent normie, and she clearly has a passion for everything she's done so far, and she's been very competent in all the roles that she's fulfilled. So I do think basic education will simply run better. As you point out, you've got the Western Cape, where that is the case, in fact. So I do think that would be the case, but I worry that that's not a basic education, just not going to be able to show enough wins. The other two is, one is Home Affairs, which is being run by Leon Schreiber, which is an interesting appointment. We had Leon Schreiber in studio, must be about 4 or 5 years ago now, maybe a little bit longer actually, 2024. And he had written a book at the time on coalitions. So it's just interesting where he's ended up. Fascinating, smart guy. Doesn't strike me as a normie, frankly. Very, very thoughtful guy. And maybe that's just because I've met him. So maybe my bias is showing in that regard. I think that will be quite interesting. Home Affairs is a bit of a mixed bag for me because I think they've done some good things. I'm actually a big supporter of Malusi Gigaba. I think that he was railroaded. And you can tell me about some bullshit corruption stuff that has never been proven in a court. Frankly, all the politicians have accusations of corruption against them. Either show us the evidence, make it clear, or put it away. But the point about him is he came along and said, we need to find a way to improve the system. And he did. He's the reason.
But I hate to burst your bubble, but the systems that he ended up implementing were actually put in place by Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. And those systems actually came from a company called Fever Tree Consulting, which at the time was run by our current president, Cyril Ramaphosa, as well as Rolf Meyer. And they put in place the technology infrastructure that made Home Affairs suddenly brilliant, which effectively got inherited by Malusi. And really all that matters at this point, because the basic infrastructure is in place. Remember that what has been happening with Home Affairs for the longest time is that because they are these highly unionized public servants, and you pitch up and they just refuse to work. And they always tell you the systems are offline. And by the way, we need to have a conversation about systems being offline in a short while. But the fact is, again, Home Affairs is simply a question of ensuring that the people on the ground are meeting the basic competence that's required in order for them to do it.
That's the brilliance of the system that currently exists, right? Is that they've subcontracted that to bank employees in many cases, or they've put their staff into banks. But there's sort of this combined management that occurs, and as a result, and a booking system with appointments, and the system is underneath the banking sort of technology in a way. It's integrated. I'm not sure exactly how it works. Look, I've spoken to quite a few people in Home Affairs, and they all credit Malusi with certainly the rollout of that program. But perhaps the invention was done by NDZ and others. The bottom line is that it's a very good system. If provided it works. I know some people have problems, for example, with getting a verification SMS off the website. That seems to be the biggest sticking point. But if you can get past that, you can get a passport in this country from the time of logging onto a website to the time of picking up your passport is probably going to be less than a month. Certainly from the time of having your appointment to having a passport or an ID card or whatever it is usually somewhere between 7 and 14 days.
Yes.
And that's impressive. And if you speak to people overseas, you will find that we are either on par or actually better than people in countries like the UK, Australia, etc. So I think that's very impressive. And I that system doesn't need to be messed with. It just maybe needs to be slightly improved upon. So I think that's what I mean by the mixed bag. But then you've got the other side of things, which is a disaster. The border and then all of the people in the country who, some of whom have been here for decades and who basically qualify for permanent residency, but for some reason just can't get it. The system seems to me to be completely corrupt. I know a lot of people who are foreigners, so to speak, but again, this example, they came here decades ago. Some of them got married to South Africans, have South African children, and can't get any kind of documents. And every time they try to, they get told that they need to pay tens of thousands of rands to some person who's kind of not in the department but is connected to the department.
So you realize how all of that can be overturned just by a ministerial decree, and
So-
can be fixed at very short notice.
How would you go about doing that?
Well, as an example, there are lots of people who have been in kind of limbo because of the fact that their applications have been delayed. And Schreiber's very quickly just turned around and said, okay, we're extending the validity of all of those travel documents until such time as you get processed. And it was just a stroke of the pen, which was all that was required. So it bypasses the inertia, immediately fixes the problem, because you've already got people who have an established trail. And we can use similar logic in terms of things like gun licensing, for example, where...
If you have a gun license, you should be able to keep your gun license.
Exactly. If you have a driver's license, and the machine's out of action...
Driver's license is the most retarded thing on the planet.
For sure. But you understand how all of these are there just simply because of administrative decisions that get taken by unelected officials. And all that's needed is for someone who actually has the ability to recognize, yes, we have a problem. Yes, this is how we fix it, and goes about and actually puts in place a very simple solution to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a lot of benefits to this. I know, if you're very much on the anti-illegal immigration side of things, I understand that, because I too am against that. But I'm not really talking about those people. These are people who've come to the country. They've registered. So in the case of many Zimbabweans, as an example, many registered for refugee status, were granted refugee status, and they have like a piece of paper that says they're a refugee, and then are unable to progress past that point. And now, if you want to make that point, you said you were a refugee. We no longer think there's a reason.
I'm not big on the refugee thing, okay? Because from my perspective, if you want to be a refugee in this country, you got to be running from real danger. And as far as I'm concerned,
100%,
there's no real danger in terms of running from Zimbabwe.
So then you cancel those.
But you do
permits.
have those Zimbabwe permits that were work permits.
Yes.
That were issued to people. And I see no reason whatsoever why those work permits should not be rolled over. By all means, you can put in place things that are going to obstruct the rolling out of new permits, and instead go for a formalized process of proper immigration. But just being,
Well, I hate to give the government ideas, but if you give people work permits, and then you say you can have the work permit provided you give us information about where you're working, right, and where the money is being deposited, and these types of things, like everyone who does work in the country needs to do, you then increase your tax collection. And I mean, I hate taxes, but if you're in government and you want to make things work more efficiently, that's one example of just doing that. Again, as I was saying, I'm not for anyone being here illegally, and even if you feel people shouldn't be here, then at least just call it quits.
For sure. But now let's make this about Schreiber, since he's at the heart of these things. And I think that both you and I, just on the surface of things, are able to see that he's able to do things in a very short space of time that will be good for the country and just generally making us more efficient. These are all good things from my perspective.
Yes. Yeah, sure. All right. So Home Affairs will be an interesting one to see how it unfolds. As I said, the good and the bad, and different sides of that coin, and some stuff that works and some stuff that really hasn't for a long time.
Now, the stuff that I've been really appreciating, though,
yes,
okay, is you look at the outpouring of support for our new Minister of Correctional Services.
Yeah, all right. So go for this, because
so we've had.
But I find it's almost satirical, that support, right? It's
yes.
like you've made this old Afrikaans man the head of like prisons.
But you have to understand that the one thing that does unite us as South Africans is that crime affects us all.
Yeah.
And our hatred for criminals and criminality is something that unites us.
Yes.
And the fundamental failure of the ANC to actually grasp that nettle and to actually deal with perps over the longest time. And you have a general understanding that when you have a hard-nosed Boer who's actually running the show, he's going to ensure that perps are behind bars. And at the point at which he turns around and says, these guys now need to work and they actually need to be paying back into society. Now, let's be very clear. There are people who work in prisons already. And, so it's not something that's something new.
Mm-hmm.
However, a commitment to actually getting perps to work, not necessarily in a chain gang type scenario.
We know I wish you would do that.
No. Chain gangs are absurd.
No, not in a. You thinking of it in the worst possible way. I mean in the context of non-violent criminals, for example, of which we have many who are locked away. And you take that group of people and say, well, we're going to take you and we're going to get you to clean up the sidewalks of whichever suburb for the next 3 months, and then we'll move on to the next suburb, whatever that happens to be, or cut down the branches that are overhanging, or just help with that kind of stuff, which, interestingly enough, this may have a lot of crossover with public works, which I want to get to. But yes, look, I think it's interesting. I think it's hilarious the way people have sort of enjoyed his appointment. Because I just think it's humorous probably because it's so stereotypical. It's like if you were going to put the one representative from the so-called Afrikaans right-wing party. I know I don't really buy that as a good description of them, but the point is, if you were going to put someone in any position, I suppose correctional services would be the most humorous one if you were doing a South Park episode, right? And so it's just funny that that's where he's ended up. But I think he'll be very good. I mean, if you've ever listened to him talk and discuss policy and his understanding of things,
he's an adult in the room.
He's probably the most qualified person in that cabinet. Just on a from a degree perspective and from a general experience in public service and just in general. So I do think he'll do a good job. But it's just quite humorous to me. That. What do you think about Dean McPherson? I thought that was a bit of an interesting point. It is Dean McPherson, eh?
It is Dean McPherson,
sorry,
yes. Public Works, yes.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting appointment, only not necessarily that the DA ended up there. I know they
I like Dean. I rate him far more highly than I rate Steenhuisen, as an example.
Okay.
And if not for the fact that he's out from KwaZulu-Natal, he would have been much higher up the ranks. Because, the DA essentially fluctuates between Cape Town and Stellenbosch and Cape Town, and the Western Cape and Cape Town and Stellenbosch. And occasionally there's Gauteng and...
very occasionally. There's far more often KZN, to be frank.
Yeah. But,
it's kind of Western Cape, then KZN, then Gauteng. But
yes, but that's only because of the GNU municipality and Papa's actually doing a good job.
There's a few others.
Yeah, but like I said, I rate McPherson, and I think that, certainly the initial moves that he's been making have been good.
Yeah, look, and throwing back to your point from before, Public Works owns everything. If it's got a government stamp on it,
yes,
they own it, or a government crest, they own it. So there's a lot of work to be done, but there's a lot of potential there, and that I think is a department where they could actually show visible difference in the next few years, as opposed to some of the others, where it's I think you've got to be smarter in the others to show visible change.
You see, more to the point, I think that he can pull off visible change without increasing the budget.
Yes. It's just about efficiency and allocation.
Yeah, it's about efficiency, and it's about removing corruption from the value chain. And if you can just get those two things under control, then suddenly things will actually start working. And look, all he has to do is to outsource maintenance of all of those buildings to the private sector around the country. And look, by all means, allocate them to BBE companies. I've got no issue with that, as long as you have the ability to fire people if they don't deliver.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's actually going to be able to do two things at the same time. He'll say, we're rolling this out, and it's going to be to new enterprises, so established enterprises need not apply. We're going to segment it on a region-by-region basis, and you end up having the contract for taking care of the following buildings. And if you don't deliver within very specific parameters that we lay down, you will be out, and we'll appoint a new business, again, ticking similar boxes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let's talk about Gates and McKenzie, who ended up in the sports, arts, and culture. Suddenly, everyone's got an issue with arts, culture, and sport being thrown together because they're not the same. And there's a very big difference between artists and sportsmen and all this kind of rubbish. Personally, I don't think any of those things should be a ministry.
I don't think we need a ministry of sport or arts and culture. Mm-hmm. And, if anything proved this, it was the fact that without a minister of sport, look how far we got in the T20 World Cup. No, seriously.
Yes. No, true.
Yeah, because there was no ministerial interference.
Yeah.
And if you let our sports people actually run the show by themselves, very quickly we're able to do stuff. So, but let's talk about Gates, and
yes.
Let's talk about Gates, and particularly in the context of the coloured community of the Western Cape, because that's how he positions himself as in terms of his support base. And let's look particularly in terms of the role of sport. And we all know what a disaster most of the Cape Flats areas are in terms of violence. And I had a very interesting conversation once on a flight from Joburg to Cape Town with a very wealthy a businessman from the Western Cape who himself comes from the Cape Flats. A fascinating business model, which I'm not going to talk about at this point, but he makes bucket loads of money.
Good for him.
He does a lot of social responsibility projects behind the scenes. But he made a very interesting point to me, and he said the points of stability historically in the Western Cape townships used to come from three places. It used to come from religion, it used to come from sport, and it used to come from the gangs. Because if any young man in any of those townships was looking to get some sort of structure into his life, he was going to find it in one of those three areas. And this was very much the case back during the apartheid era. And so there was an uneasy truce that took place between those various sectors. And let's be very clear. This is by no means an endorsement of gang culture. Okay, it's just actually recognizing the fact that
it's what it offers, right?
But gangs, they provide a particular type of structure. It's not a desirable structure from my perspective, but it is very structured. And it coexisted within the framework of very firm religious convictions, whether it was Christian or Islamic, but those were very well defined structures again within those townships. And then again, sport was a major thing. Remember that during the apartheid era, Athlone Stadium would be filled every single weekend because you had teams that were playing that were actually representative of those particular areas, and they had massive support bases within those areas. And you track, just trace back during the apartheid era, looking back to the 80s as an example, where you had in all of these race-based townships, you had very strong sports teams that emerged from there, and they used to actually compete very effectively at a national level, but they were unifying forces within those communities. And I feel very strongly that doing something like introducing support for setting up soccer teams in Athlone and not trying to force an artificial sense of integration upon those soccer teams so that you can actually build a sense of the communities having a sense of loyalty towards those teams. It's a very different situation at the international level where players get bought and sold. So Manchester United is actually not representative of Manchester at any level. Okay, it just happens to be that that a support base that comes from there. But certainly at the level of building grassroots support for sport, that needs to actually happen at the level of those individual communities. And if Gauteng can just simply do something as simple as that, which is to provide support throughout the country for setting up just a framework that makes it possible for those teams to then flourish, and then actually create community-based soccer matches that are then going to be taking place on a region-by-region basis and fanning it out to the rest of the country. I believe that can provide a point of stability in terms of those communities, which right now you don't currently have role models in those communities other than gangs.
Yeah. I like that idea. And I think people have been a bit harsh on Gauteng. I know he's the type of politician who rubs people up the wrong way and enjoys doing it too. And I disagree with him vehemently on many issues. But I think people need to give him a chance because he is the type of guy who seems to take the bull by the horns. If you don't believe that, I don't know what to tell you. The Oak was a criminal and in prison, came out, and whether you feel he did it legitimately or not, he made a lot of money, started a political party, managed to garner the support, and ended up with a lot more support than he theoretically on paper should have, and is now a member of parliament and a minister. So, I think you underestimate a guy like him at your own peril. And so if he puts his mind to it, I think he could do really great things. And I think that's a lovely idea. I know you're putting ideas out there because you're hoping someone's actually listening.
No, but we do know that there are people listening.
We do to a point.
Our numbers have been having a steady uptake.
Yes.
But more to the point, the fact that people are prepared to sit through you and I having a chinwag for more than an hour
yes,
and then actually give us positive
and arguing
feedback.
About Elon Musk. Yeah, we sure. Interestingly, on that point, the soccer is a nice idea. While you were saying that, I was just thinking, if Gauteng put his mind in the funding, because there's a fair amount of funding that actually runs through that in sports, as an example.
But not an extraordinary amount of funding. It's really at the level of providing support for ensuring that the stadiums are actually maintained.
I'm thinking even smaller than that.
Apologies to my Latin friends. It should be stadia, not stadiums. But yeah.
I think of paddle, which has become it's spreading like cancer almost among communities. But
it's hugely popular.
It's hugely popular,
and more crucially,
soccer you actually have to be good at. Paddle you don't have to be good at tennis or paddle or anything.
Interesting thing about paddle is also that it's not determined by your income status.
Yes, yeah. So
which again, it's a win-win at that level.
Paddle necessarily, but I'm saying imagine if
you
could get sport into communities, all communities where the whole country just did like that, because soccer you've got to be quite good, to play soccer on a team. You've got to actually have skill. Paddle is a lot less skill than almost any other sport I've ever played. And so I'm just thinking something like that. Almost you think back to like the aerobics crazes of the 80s and 90s, where everybody would sort of watch the television and the people doing aerobics on the TV and then try to copy them. But, something like that has great potential. And then in arts and culture, I don't know where you begin there. I do think that that's actually quite a challenge. But I think just being supportive enough of those areas and not interfering, but letting them just kind of be, it would be important. And perhaps going to the Minister of Basic Education and introducing some culture into schools, because I don't know in terms of the curricula how good that actually is.
Well, we did have Serafina, I remember. You don't want to necessarily go down that route.
No.
But look, let's take the view.
Yes.
It's certainly from the perspective of arts and culture.
Yeah.
There are strong bodies in almost every major center that have been managing to keep arts and culture alive in terms of developing new material, tapping into expertise at a grassroots level. My old friend Mike van Kraan out in the Western Cape, who occasionally pops up here with productions, and the stuff that Mike has been doing over the course of years, in spite of the fact that he's had practically zero support. And I'm just going to give you an example of something that he said probably about a decade ago. He said the Department of Arts and Culture issued a tender for the drafting of a quadrennial report on how it had implemented the UNESCO Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expression, which they submitted after the closing date of 30th April 2012, where such reports were to be submitted to UNESCO. It received 3 bids for this process, one for 688,000. These were in euros, okay? So 68,000 euros, another for 93,000 euros, and a third for 98,000 euros. And the Department of Arts and Culture selected the most expensive bidder to do the job, a job that could have been done by an arts and culture employee. A 30-page report which cost R1 million, or roughly 30,000 rand per page. Now, just imagine that if the Department of Arts and Culture were taking all of this money that currently gets thrown into utter stupidity that benefits no one and actually puts it into very simple things like if you guys are able to put together a production and sell tickets, we'll subsidize the cost of a hall. And I'll give that as an example, okay, for you to host it. Because, by and large, a major part of actually getting access to markets is having access to facilities where you're able to put it up. Now, again, lots of communities have these multi-purpose centers that are established, but again, they're not maintained. So now you've got 2 things that come together. You've got Gauteng with the propensity to say to Department of Public Works, can you ensure that this is fixed and maintained to a certain minimum standard? And hey presto, suddenly things start coming together. Sure. So I think, again, the opportunity for Gauteng to be able to do things by just simply not doing wasteful expenditure.
Yeah, I'll give you another example. So the National Film and Video Foundation, or whatever it is, loves BE. If you're a white male director, you will not, or producer, you will not get funding from them, basically. And Gauteng has pretty much made it clear that he's not really a big fan of those types of policies. So something like that, just opening up film for whoever, who cares? If you're creative, what difference does it make what color you are or what gender you are? So hopefully, he'll move in on some of that kind of stuff. I wish him the best of luck. Maybe he will fail, but I hope that he doesn't. And again, I think you bet against that guy at your own peril. Tell me, what do you think? Those are the sort of main opposition. I suppose those are the ones of great interest because they come from the DA. That was the main conflict, was the ANC versus the DA. What were the DA going to get? We didn't skip the DA. Did also get forestry and fisheries. Dion George, I think it is part of those. I don't know if you hold a big candle to that department.
So fisheries is interesting, okay, because remember that there's been a substantial amount of corruption in terms of fisheries, particularly in terms of allocation of fishing licenses, particularly off the shore of the Western Cape, which goes back to Tina Jumat-Peterson's time. Mm-hmm. And again, is there an opportunity to very quickly make this into a relatively profitable sector for the country? Now, one of the major issues that we have in terms of fisheries is that our fishing rights are not actually enforced. So, we've got our territorial waters, but we've also got our economic exclusion zone, which is 200 kilometers off the coast, which is meant to be exclusive fishing. And we are very clear that there are trawlers that come from the Far East that fish in those waters and help themselves to fish and and go off
we
to
do
the rest of the
nothing
world.
about it.
Because of the fact that, our Ministry of Defense is incompetent.
Well, now Angie Motshekga is in charge of that. So
Sure. Right. But is it actually then possible that one can end up finding a way to ensure that those rights at least get enforced at the level of tracking and then actually imposing fines upon the trawlers that end up violating those conditions? And I think the answer to that is yes.
Okay. One point about that department, which I do know, is that Barbara Creasy was in charge of it. Barbara Creasy, who is now somehow the Minister of Transport. So expect EVs to become a thing because Barbara Creasy loves the sort of climate change movement. But one thing that Barbara Creasy was doing was, as the head of the Environment Ministry previously, she was forcing Eskom to throttle their power output. The reason why you don't have load shedding at the moment is not as the energy experts will have you believe, that Eskom was burning more diesel than ever before, because that's evidentially not, sorry, it's quite a mouthful. It's not
So
true.
you and I are in agreement that Creasy was a disaster simply because of her green agenda.
Yes.
And
She told Eskom, look, you can't run plants at maximum because then the output to the environment's bad, and the EU doesn't like that.
you might remember that the very first conversation that you and I had face to face, which was when you and Raman were running the Renegade Report. And one of the questions that I was asked was that if there was a single job that I would do running the country, what would it be? And I said I would fix transport.
Yes.
Because transport, to my mind, is the single bit of glue that holds the entire country together. And if you can simply get that fixed, you're immediately going to open up the country at a number of levels. And look, it's very clear that Creasy is incapable of doing that.
Yes.
Right. So
Look, she's 66 years old. She doesn't have the vision for this.
I know, yeah, but yes. But who's her deputy? You see, that's the interesting thing that we haven't talked about, because remember, a lot of these ministries actually have DA deputies.
Yeah, so her deputy is not, as far as I know, it's an ANC deputy. I'll have to check the exact name. I mean, I agree with you on that. But just quickly, so the reason we have no throttling of Eskom is the reason why we now don't have, partly the reason why we don't have load shedding.
Well, 100 days without load shedding.
Yeah, there's also control of the syndicates, and there's been actual work done in terms of fixing some things. So it's not to say that it's gone forever, but certainly there has actually been some positive developments, which I think you have to give Ramaphosa some credit. The guy has clearly done some good work. And I think that one of the biggest lies we were ever told or sold was the idea that Andre de Ruyter was the great savior. I think that was completely untrue. I think he was completely selling us out. And I'm very grateful that he's not there anymore. And even I was mistaken about him at one point. So not even I, but I was mistaken about him at one point. On the transport thing, I made this point to someone this week, that if you just, in Johannesburg, for example, if you just found a way that people who live in Soweto don't have to catch 2 taxis to get to, say, the northern suburbs or Sandton, that would chop off at least 2 hours of their travel time every day. 2 more hours they would have with their kids, 2 more hours they would have to sleep, 2 more hours they would have at home. That's life-changing stuff. And it's such a simple fix. I know there's obviously, the taxi cartel, but that's such a simple thing that could be done.
So the Metro Rail trains have been actually running on a fairly regular basis over the past while. Hasn't yet gotten to the point where it's able to hit a critical mass. Because remember, the issue that you always have in terms of rail is the last mile problem. And we're going to have taxis as the last mile point of conveyance for the longest time to come. The most efficient solution, really, is to extend Gautrain down into Soweto,
100%.
which should have been done from day
That
one.
was promised. That was the original
which
plan.
should have been done from day one. And look, phase 2 of Gautrain, which again has been constantly delayed. Now the problem, of course, in terms of that, and that needs to bring us back to the fact that the government in Gauteng is now
let's go in
it's very firmly in the hands of Panyaza Lesufi. And look, no matter what you may think of the man, give him kudos because he pulled off
34% of the vote and has 90% of the power.
Yes, but understand that effectively the way in which he's able to do this. So there are 80 seats in the Gauteng legislature. The ANC has got 28 of those seats, and the EFF has got 11 of those seats. So, which brings them up to 39. So all he had to do was to co-opt 2 additional people. So he co-opted
Rise and
the IFP.
Why don't you remember that, folks in Parkview, next time, please?
Yeah. So he co-opted Rise Mzansi, and which gives him a relatively tenuous, but it's tenuous only for as long as he doesn't piss off the EFF.
Yeah.
And the EFF are now, really struggling for relevance at a number of levels.
So they can't sit quietly in Gauteng government, basically.
Yes, but remember that the EFF now also has portfolios within the Gauteng government. My perspective is that the DA was correct to actually walk away. Okay, because I think what they're going to be able to do, on the assumption that KZN actually ends up working properly, and a lot of the national departments end up working properly, is that it's effectively going to be showing people in Gauteng that there's going to be the possibility of things actually being a lot better here in Africa's largest economy, in Gauteng. Also, it's only 2 years to go to the municipal elections. And I think that within that short space of time, you're going to have an even more substantial decline in terms of the ANC support. Because remember, Gauteng does have a rural base. And the ANC support comes from that rural base within Gauteng. Because the urban areas overwhelmingly voted for DA versus the rural areas voting for the ANC. And there's that urban-rural split. And also we must point out that massive numbers of black people in Gauteng voted for the DA.
Yeah,
okay.
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
So, they're all of those
things. In fact,
things.
you could probably say now, reasonably, you could say the black middle class votes for the DA to a very large extent, and certainly in the cities.
Well, there's a substantial body of votes that comes from the black middle class into the DA, absolutely. And so we're going to have an interesting time in Gauteng for the next couple of years, I'll say. Very crucially, is Panyaza going to be able to continue to siphon off public funds for the benefit of the party in the presence of a single Rise Mzansi person and a single IFP person? Rise Mzansi's an unknown quantity for me in terms of their ability to deal with corruption. The IFP is far more solid in terms of its commitment to not being corrupt, just simply because for the longest time, that's been their slogan, that you can trust them. And I think by and large, they've tried to keep that point.
Why do you think that they decided to get into bed with the ANC?
Because it's a question of, if they were not doing so, was it going to be who the other two? It's Action SA or it's Bossa?
Is it Bossa or is it, does Al Jamaa not have Gauteng support? I'm not quite sure.
Al Jamaa might potentially have had a seat. I don't recall. But again, I think that...
You just take your opportunities, basically.
Look, I think that the IFP are very pragmatic.
Yeah.
And they do have an ability to work with everyone.
Yes, that's true.
And I think that under the circumstances, given that they had a government that they effectively voted for, because remember that the DA voted for Panyaza to come in on the misguided belief that Panyaza would adhere to the spirit of the agreement that was signed between the ANC and the DA, and clearly he could not be trusted to do that, and so it's very clear that it's in defiance of the will of Ramaphosa. But again, Ramaphosa has never had the testicular fortitude to actually enforce any type of
The
ruling.
question is, which you basically alluded to, is the ANC must know at some level they're in trouble.
Yes.
And they've got a choice to make, which is either they can govern in such a way that people have to question twice.
But the ANC is not monolithic, John. And you have to take that view behind the scenes that the ANC is still very much split into factions that have support for.
True, but in an overall governance perspective, and if you're sort of in the national echelons and you're looking down on Gauteng and you're having conversations with Lesotho, for example, I would imagine the conversations go something along the lines of kind of, don't screw this up, because our last vestige of real power is what we've managed to cobble together at a national level, which looks like it may very well decline if we don't do a good job. And regardless,
I think we labor under the misapprehension that the ANC's at a national level has the ability to talk to
the people in the
to
branches.
Structures at the lower levels, and this is an organization that just think of it as a giant feudal structure, with feudal overlords down at regional levels.
And so the king in one area doesn't tell the lord in another area how to behave, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yeah.
I got you. All right, let's wrap it up with the last sort of few. I don't see any major changes. We've got a teacher, a teacher as the head of water and sanitation, with no background in engineering or anything like that. So
I have multiple solutions for that in my book, and I'm very happy to share that.
Yes.
In fact, I've got solutions for everything in my book.
Of course you do.
And actually, with a bit of luck, it's actually going to be in all of the major bookstores within
That's
the
superb.
next couple
That
of
really
weeks.
is excellent news. So water and sanitation, Ronald Lamola in international affairs. So that will embarrass us again several times over the next 5 years if the government sticks together. So that's a terrible appointment. And of course, an area I've obviously covered as a journalist deeply, health. Aaron Motsoaledi back in health, because he, of course, is the godfather of NHI. And so we can expect health to just continue to get worse, I would imagine.
You're familiar with the NHLS being effectively locked down.
Just quickly, NHLS is the lab service.
The lab service.
That is used by all government hospitals.
Yeah, so it's the equivalent of Ampath and Lancet for the masses.
Mm-hmm.
And effectively their systems have been shut down by a ransomware attack.
Yes, for several weeks now.
Yes. And I think it was 24th of June that this happened. My inside information is that it's been turned into an opportunity to award a 20 million rand firewall contract to particular branches who are now guaranteeing that, well, it's because of the fact your network was not protected, and you're going to give us this 20 bars, and we're going to put in place this equipment, and things are going to start working mysteriously again. Also today, a number of people were telling me, and then I checked on X, and it turns out that a lot of people have have had problems with their Standard Bank accounts, with amounts being siphoned off mainly by overseas players. So I had a couple of individuals calling me and saying, so one person said, well, I had 18.70 Rand taken from my account, but my wife had 12,000 Rand taken from her account.
Jeez.
Debit cards. Okay. And it's like, guys, surely you've got two-factor authentication before you allow people.
Debits.
Yeah, okay, yeah. But making use of debit cards with CVVs. I mean, surely you have checks and balances in place for that. No official pronouncements that I've seen so far from Standard Bank at this level, but certainly the number of people who've been responding so far, give me reason to believe that
there's a problem there.
That there is a problem there. And I just want to say shout out to Michael Jordan's Bank Zero, because, he's been able to ride very safely about this. And, I think he claims that they have the best cybersecurity in the business. And I think that to a large extent that's true.
He's probably right. I mean, he's very on top of these things and always has been. Last thing I want to do is just make an appeal to the most important minister of all, who we haven't yet discussed. And that is the Minister of Mineral Resources and Petroleum, which is, of course, Gwede Mantashe. And I just want to say to him, you, sir, have the greatest ability to change the lives of South Africans. Out of every other minister...
Drill, frack.
Drill, baby drill. We have amongst the largest petroleum and gas reserves, untapped gas reserves in the world. That would make an incredible difference to the lives of people.
And Creasy is not going to shut you down now.
Creasy won't shut you down. I mean, the guy from the DA, he might try, but I doubt it. Do it properly. There are ways to do it that you can be environmentally friendly, and you can do it in a way to damage things the least that is possible. Obviously, everything has externalities. But really, I know, sir, that you just want to get rich. I'm more than happy with you getting very wealthy off of this. I have no objections to that, provided you just spread the love.
No, Gwede's already rich. He just wants to be the tiger.
Then let him be the tiger. Please, can we, for goodness sake, kick up the fracking, kick up the drilling. Let's do the offshore drilling. Let's make ourselves oil rich. And that changes everything. And for all you people who love...
And you don't even need Starlink to do that.
No, then you don't. Then you can drill the cables there, Kanthan. And then that entire conversation was pointless. I really hope... I know he's not going to do any of that to that extent, but I really hope there's maybe a little bit of thought from his part. Maybe it won't be thought. Maybe it'll just be someone who approaches him and goes, this is a good way to get rich. Fine. I really hope there's a little bit of thought and movement that happens in that area, because I think it has massive, massive potential for the country and for people in the country, and just to uplift the country. We talk about transport. If you can imagine a fuel price of 5 Rand per litre as opposed to 25 Rand per litre, that would make an incredible difference in the lives of every single South African. It's a change that affects every single person. The cost of food drops, the cost of transport drops. Everything just improves with something like that. And hopefully, again, I don't expect miracles, but I would hope just a little bit of movement. Anything lastly from you and any other ministers you want to get into?
No, I think that these are early days, and I always tend to look at the bright side of life up front. That old saying of mine: "Trust in Allah, but tie your camel." Yeah. So this is a bit of that, and I think that there's a lot of potential that's out there right now. I've been really impressed with the way in which the guys have been pulling together in KZN. And my word, does Durban desperately need to be extricated from the morass that it is right now? And Godspeed to them. And let's see how this goes. But a lot can change in the next couple of weeks. We might have a complete collapse of the GNU.
Yes, that could happen as well. That could happen as well. But hopefully not. I am enjoying the direction things are taking. And if I look at the uncertainties in other places and in other countries, it's not too bad to be here right now.
And Steenhuisen should wear the courtbrook. I think it's important. It's important.
Well, there's a couple of memes floating around. I'm I'm responsible for at least 2 of those. But yes, I do hope he dons them at some point. Although, of course, the online racists will have an absolute field day with that. But who cares? Who cares? Thank you, as always, joining me and waiting for me in the beginning.
They also serve who only stand and wait.
Right. We will obviously catch you all next time. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do share it with anyone you think will also enjoy it.
And if you're outraged by it, please share it so that other people can.
Yes, we want other people to be outraged too. Please do complain on our formal complaints line. You can also like and subscribe. That's the best way to complain. If you just hit the like button or the subscribe button, immediately sends an email to the complaint line, who will get back to you in short order. And we will catch you next time.